Hey, my name is Ben Hartley. I'm 37 years old, and I run a small bakery on the corner of the street where I've lived my whole adult life. I'll tell you how it started, because nobody believes it the first time. My neighbor knocked on my door on a Thursday night and asked me to be her husband for the weekend. I'd lost my wife 3 years before, and I hadn't said yes to anything bigger than a bread order since. I said yes to a stranger's marriage before I'd finished my coffee. And by Sunday, the only thing about that weekend that wasn't real was the part we'd planned. Let me back up. My wife's name was Anna. We opened the bakery together 9 years ago, 2 kids with a loan and a second-hand oven, and more nerve than sense. She was the heart of the place. I did the early baking, she ran the front, knew every customer's name, slipped free cookies to every kid who came through the door. The bakery smelled like cinnamon and her, and I used to think that smell would outlive both of us. She got sick the winter of our 6th year. By spring, she was gone. I was 34 years old, and I didn't know how to be a person without her. I kept the bakery open because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. I baked every morning the way I always had, but I stopped doing the parts that were hers. I stopped learning new customers' names. I stopped slipping cookies to kids. I'd bake 40 loaves and sell them through a window like a vending machine and go home to a dark apartment. And the smell that used to mean Anna just meant another day to get through. There was one thing she used to say that I couldn't shake. When we first opened and I'd panic about baking too much, making too much, she'd laugh at me. Ben, she'd say, you can't bake for one. That's not what the oven's for. The whole point is somebody walking in the door because they smelled it from the street. You bake like somebody's coming. Always, after she died, I baked plenty. But I stopped baking like anyone was coming. Nobody walked in. I made sure of it. Then there was Tessa. Tessa Lane lived 2 doors down with her little boy Milo. She was a hairstylist, 34, and she was the busiest person I'd ever seen, always coming or going, a kid on her hip or by her hand, juggling a stroller and grocery bags and a phone wedged against her shoulder. We were neighbors the way city people are neighbors. Hellos in the hallway. A held elevator. I knew Milo liked the chocolate chip more than the oatmeal because once, before I'd decided to stop, I'd handed him a day-old cookie and watched his whole face light up. I'd fixed her porch light once, shoveled her stretch of walk a few winters. Small things. The things you do without it meaning anything. I didn't know her. Not really. So when she knocked on my door that Thursday night, I was surprised to even see her there. Ben, she said, I need to ask you something insane, and I need you to let me get all the way through it before you say no. Okay. She took a breath like she was about to jump off something. My parents' 40th anniversary is this weekend. The whole family's going up to the lake house. My sister, my mom, all of them. Her hands were twisting together. And about 4 months ago, on the phone, my mother she does this thing where she makes me feel like the family disaster. The divorced single mom who can't keep her life together. And Milo was crying in the background. And I was so tired. And I told her I'd met someone. A good man. That it was serious. Her voice dropped. And then I let it grow, because every time I called, she'd ask, and it was the only time she sounded proud of me. By last month, I'd told her we'd gotten married. Quietly, no big wedding. I didn't say anything. I just listened, the way Anna would have. It's not even about me, Tessa said, and now her eyes were wet. It's about Milo. Every reunion, my sister's perfect kids have their perfect dad, and the aunts look at my boy like he's missing something, and they ask him where his daddy is right to his face. And he's 6, Ben, He doesn't have an answer, and it's not his job to have one. She wiped her eyes hard, angry at the tears. I just wanted him to have one weekend where nobody looked at him like that. One weekend where he got to be a kid with a family, like everybody else's. And now the weekend's here and I have to either produce a husband or admit I made the whole thing up and prove every awful thing they think about me. She looked at me, desperate and mortified. You're kind. You're alone. You're the only person I could think of who might say yes. Will you be my husband for one weekend? The old me, the me from the last 3 years, would have said no. I said no to everything. No was safe. No was a dark apartment and 40 loaves and the door staying shut. But I looked at Tessa Lane standing in my doorway, exhausted, brave enough to ask a near stranger for help to protect her little boy's feelings, and I heard Anna laughing in the back of my head. You bake like somebody's coming, Ben, always. Yes, I said. She blinked. Yes? Just yes? I'll need to know our story, I said. How we met. When, what I do that you fell for. If your sister's as sharp as you say, she'll test it. I stepped back to let her in. Come in. We've got a marriage to invent before Saturday. We spent 3 hours at my kitchen table building a life. We met at the bakery, true enough, easy to remember. I'd given her son a cookie, also true. I'd asked her to coffee, then dinner. We'd married small because we'd both been burned before and didn't want a circus. We rehearsed how we'd look at each other, what I'd call her, the fact that I take my coffee black and she takes hers with too much sugar. Around midnight, Milo wandered out in his pajamas, rubbing his eyes, and stopped dead when he saw me at his mother's table. You're the cookie man, he said. I am, I said. Tessa knelt down. Milo, baby, this is Ben. He's going to come to Grandma's with us this weekend. He's a really good friend, and he's going to help us have a nice time. Okay? Milo studied me with the total seriousness only a 6-year-old can manage. Do you have cookies at the lake? I'll bring some, I said. I'll bring a whole box. He nodded like we'd signed a contract, and he went back to bed, and Tessa looked at me across the table with something between gratitude and terror, and I felt, for the first time in 3 years, like I'd said yes to my own life. The lake house was bigger than I'd pictured, and louder than I'd braced for. Tessa's family came at us in a wave the second we pulled in her father. Warm and a little overwhelmed, her mother Diane with a smile that took inventory, and her sister, Brooke, polished and married to a man named Greg, who shook my hand like he was assessing collateral. I was introduced as Ben, the husband, the baker, and I watched the family recalibrate in real time. They'd expected Tessa to show up alone again, the way she always had. Instead, she'd arrived with a quiet, steady man and a son who, within the hour, was following me around asking if I could skip stones. I could skip stones. Anna and I used to. I taught Milo on the dock that first afternoon. The two of us crouched at the water's edge, and when he finally got one to hop twice, he screamed loud enough to scatter the birds and threw his arms around my neck. And something in my chest that had been closed for 3 years cracked clean open. That was the first thing that got complicated. I'd agreed to fake being Tessa's husband. Nobody had warned me about her son. The first dinner was the real test. 12 of us around a long table on the screened porch, citronella candles burning, and Tessa's mother, Diane, presiding over all of it with that smile that took inventory. She waited until the plates were full before she started. So, Ben, she said, you'll have to forgive a mother for being curious. Tessa kept you such a secret. 4 months ago we'd never heard your name, and now here you are, married. She set down her fork. How does a sensible man marry a woman with all of Tessa's complications so quickly? I felt Tessa go rigid beside me. Across the table, Brooke watched with interest, waiting for me to fumble the story. Honestly, I said, because I wasn't sensible about it at all. I reached over and put my hand over Tess's. I lost my wife 3 years ago. I'd decided I was done, that I'd had my one good thing, and that was the end of it. I baked my bread, and I kept to myself, and I was very, very careful never to want anything again. I looked at Diane, and then a woman I barely knew let her little boy follow me around a bakery, and showed up every day exhausted from a double shift, and still asked the kid about his day before she asked about anything else. And I watched her do that for months before I ever got the nerve to ask her to coffee. Quickly isn't the word I'd use. Ma'am, I'd say I took the long way to the most obvious decision of my life. The table went quiet. Diane's smile faltered into something more uncertain. And little Milo, who'd been pushing peas around his plate, piped up without looking up. Ben makes the best cookies in the whole world. He brought a whole box. It's in the car. He sure did, buddy, I said. Tessa's father laughed, the tension broke, and somebody asked about the bakery, and the dinner moved on. But Tessa's hand stayed under mine the whole meal, and once, when no one was looking, she squeezed it, and this time it wasn't for the story. I was almost sure of it. The weekend went better than either of us had any right to expect at first. I held Tessa's hand when the family was watching, and let go when they weren't. I called her by the soft name we'd practiced. We told our story, and it held. And the strange thing, the thing neither of us said out loud, was how little of it felt like acting. Sitting next to her at the long dinner table, laughing at her father's terrible jokes, catching her eye across the room, it didn't feel like a performance. It felt like a memory of something I'd lost, and the start of something I hadn't dared want. But Brooke was watching. She cornered me on the porch the second evening, a glass of wine in her hand and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "So," she said, "Ben the baker, you married my sister awfully fast. Funny she never mentioned you until a few months ago, and suddenly you're married?" She tilted her head. Tessa's always been impulsive. It's sort of her thing, leaping into disasters and expecting the rest of us to feel sorry for her when they fall apart. The divorce. Raising Milo on no money. Now this. She sipped. "I just hope you know what you signed up for. She's a lot of work, my sister. Always has been. And I'll tell you, something happened in me on that porch. I'd come up here to play a part, to hold a hand and tell a story and go home Sunday. But I'd spent 2 days watching Tessa run herself ragged, making sure everyone else had a good time. Watching her shield Milo from the aunt's questions. Watching her absorb her mother's little cuts with a grace that cost her more than any of them knew. And here was her own sister, calling that a disaster. "Can I tell you what I see?" I said quietly. "I see a woman who's raised a kind, funny, brave little boy completely on her own. Who works on her feet all day and never once made it your problem. Who came up to this lake every single year and let this family treat her like the cautionary tale, and still showed up smiling so her son could have a holiday." I held Brooke's eyes. "You call that a disaster? I've been around a while, Brooke. I lost the person I loved most in the world. And I learned something doing it. Most people break under a quarter of what your sister carries every day without complaining. You don't pity people like Tessa. You stand up when they walk in the room." Brooke's smile was gone. She didn't have anything to say. She went back inside. What I didn't know was that Tessa had come out to find me, and had stopped in the doorway, and had heard all of it. She didn't say anything either. But that night, after Milo was asleep in the bunk room, she found me on the dock where I'd gone to be alone with the water, and she sat down beside me. Close, and for a long while neither of us spoke. "You weren't supposed to mean it," she finally said. On the porch. "That was way past the job." "I know. Why'd you say it then?" "Because it was true," I said. "And because somebody in this family should have said it to your face 10 years ago, and nobody ever has." I looked at her in the dark. "Tessa, can I ask you something real? Not for the story. For me." "Okay, Milo's dad. What happened?" She was quiet a moment, watching the water. "He left when Milo was 8 months old," she said. "Decided fatherhood wasn't for him. Cleaned out the account on his way out the door. I never told my family the half of it. I let them think the divorce was just two people who didn't work out. Because the truth made me feel like more of a failure, like I should have seen it coming." She pulled her knees up. "So they think I picked wrong and gave up. They don't know I've done every single thing for that little boy alone since he was a baby. They never asked. It was easier to be the family disaster than to explain." "You're not the disaster," I said. "You're the only one of them I'd trust with anything that mattered." She turned and looked at me, and the moonlight was on the water, and I realized the distance I'd been keeping between the performance and the truth had closed completely, somewhere between the dock and the porch, and there was no pretending left in either direction. "This was supposed to be fake," she whispered. "I know," I said. "When did it stop?" "I don't know," she said. "Somewhere around the second hop of that stone. I kissed her on the dock at the lake house, and there was nothing fake about it. And nothing about it was for an audience, because there wasn't one. Just the two of us and the water and a thing that had snuck up on both of us while we weren't watching." Then a small voice behind us said, "Are you my mom's husband for real, or just for the weekend?" We both turned. Milo stood at the end of the dock in his pajamas, the way he had that first night, having wandered out half asleep and found us. Tessa's face went white. "Baby, what are you? Aunt Brooke said it's not real," Milo said, and his lip was trembling. "She told her kids you're just pretend. She said you're going to leave Sunday like everybody leaves." He looked at me, and his small face was breaking, and he asked the only question that mattered. "Are you going to leave too?" "I want to tell you I had a plan. I didn't. I had a 6-year-old asking me the truest question anyone had ever asked me, and a woman beside me holding her breath, and 3 years of a shut door behind me. I got down on the dock so I was level with him. "Milo," I said, "here's the truth, and I'm only ever going to tell you the truth. Your aunt's right that I came up here this weekend pretending. Your mom and I made a deal, because she wanted you to have a really good time, and that's how much she loves you, she'd do anything." I took a breath. But somewhere this weekend, I stopped pretending. I taught a kid to skip stones, and I didn't want to stop. I sat next to your mom at dinner, and I didn't want to go home. So no, I'm not going to leave Sunday. I held out my hand to him. "If your mom will have me, I'd like to come around for real. For a long time. The slow way. Is that okay with you?" Milo looked at my hand. Then he ignored it completely and threw both arms around my neck. And over his shoulder I saw Tessa with both hands pressed to her mouth, crying the way she'd been too strong to cry in front of her family all weekend. We didn't announce anything to the family. We didn't have to. We just stopped pretending, and somehow that was louder than any announcement. We took the slow way, exactly like I promised Milo. Real dates. Real time. I learned how Tessa took her coffee for real, and it was nothing like the story we'd invented. She learned that I talked to my late wife sometimes, out loud, in the early mornings at the bakery, and instead of being threatened by it, she asked me to tell her about Anna. And she listened, and she let Anna be part of us, instead of a ghost between us. That's a rare kind of grace. I'd only met it once before. There was one evening, a few months in, that I knew for certain. It was late, the bakery closed, and I was teaching Milo to knead dough at the big steel table while Tessa swept up front. He had flour to his elbows and a look of fierce concentration, and out of nowhere he said, "Was your other wife good at this?" I'd told him about Anna by then, the simple true version a kid can hold. I stopped, my hands in the dough. "She was better than me," I said. "She taught me half of what I know. She used to say the whole point of a bakery is that somebody walks in because they smelled it from the street." I pressed his small hands back into the dough, showing him the fold. "She'd have liked you a lot, Milo. She'd have given you the first cookie out of every batch." He thought about that with the gravity of a judge. "Is it okay that you have me now? And my mom? Or does it make her sad?" Tessa had stopped sweeping. She was standing in the doorway, very still. "It doesn't make her sad," I said. And I believed it as I said it. I think she'd be glad somebody finally walked in the door. She never liked it when the place was empty. I looked up and found Tessa's eyes over the boy's head, both of us understanding the same thing at the same moment. She used to say you can't bake for one. Turns out she was right about that, same as she was right about everything. Tessa came over and put her arms around both of us, flour and all, and the three of us stood in the warm closed bakery, and I knew I was never going to let this be the slow way for much longer. Milo started coming to the bakery after school for good after that. He'd do his homework at the little table by the window and announce loudly to every customer that the baker was his baker. And slowly, without my deciding to, I started learning their names again. I started slipping cookies to the kids again. The smell of the place stopped meaning a day to get through and started meaning what it used to mean. Tessa and I were married a little over a year later for real this time. A small one, the kind we'd invented on a story, but got to live for true. Milo carried the rings. Her father cried. Her sister Brooke came, subdued and a little kinder than she'd been, and hugged Tessa for a long moment at the end and didn't say anything, which from Brooke was practically a speech. I adopted Milo the following spring. The day the papers came through, he asked if he could call me Dad instead of Ben, and I had to step into the back of the bakery for a few minutes before I could answer him, because some yeses are too big to get out the first time you try. We went back to the lake house that next summer, for real this time. Same family, same long porch, same citronella candles. But something had shifted. Diane asked Tessa about her work and actually waited for the answer. The aunts stopped asking Milo where his daddy was, because the answer was sitting right next to him teaching his cousins to skip stones. And at dinner, when Tessa stood up to help clear the plates the way she always had, her father put a hand on her arm and said, "Sit, sweetheart. You've cleared enough tables in this family. Let somebody clear yours for once." It was a small thing. Tessa cried in the kitchen over it anyway. 40 years of being the one nobody stood up for. And all it had taken was one stranger on a porch deciding she was worth standing up for and then refusing to sit back down. For a long time I thought this was a story about a fake marriage that turned real over one complicated weekend. But that wasn't the story. The story is that a woman knocked on a closed door and asked a grieving man to pretend to have a family for 2 days. And in pretending, he remembered that a family was the only thing he'd ever actually wanted, and had been too afraid to want again. Tessa thought she was asking me for a favor. She thought she was the one who needed rescuing the family disaster, the one who couldn't get her life right. She had no idea she was the one doing the saving. She knocked on the one door in that building that had been shut for 3 years, and she opened it without even knowing it was closed. My wife used to tell me, "You can't bake for one." that the whole point of the oven is somebody walking in the door because they smelled it from the street. For 3 years after I lost her, I baked plenty, and I let nobody come. Then a tired single mother and a 6-year-old who loved chocolate chip cookies walked into my life through a lie and stayed for the truth. These days I bake like somebody's coming. Because every single day now, somebody does.